Okay, well, we'll make a start then. Thanks everyone for joining so promptly at the start of the hour. We are going to be having this session for the whole hour up until, well, it's 4 p.m. here in the UK where I'm calling from, but of course we've got people joining from all over the world, so various time zones. We're delighted to have our guest speaker, Dr. Joel Rudin, with us here. So really looking forward to getting into the conversation soon with you, Joel. So Joel's calling in from based at Rowan University. So we're recording the session. We'll be hearing from Joel. We'll be going through some slides in terms of how he's using simulations and the link between assurance of learning, of course, as well. Yeah, well, just to say, if you want to ask any questions, we're going to try and make this session as participative as possible. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat whenever you like. Don't wait till the end. Feel free to ask questions as we're going along. That's absolutely fine. If you'd like to ask your questions verbally as well, then feel free to unmute yourself. So raise your hands or take your cameras. You show your cameras as well. We're quite happy. So it's quite an informal session, this one, and hopefully, as I say, as participative as possible. So great. Well, just to say then, I'll probably spend 5 or so minutes just going through a few slides just to give a little background, as I always like to do before we hand over to hear from our guest speaker. I'll just be talking a little bit in terms of our approach to simulations in general, a little bit of history on the company, and also how the simulation which Joel uses fits into in the wider context of our portfolio of simulations as well. Okay, well, here we go. So a little bit about Edgemundo. Well, we've actually been established in 2001. So we have 20 years of developing these management simulations. So quite some experience, as you can tell. We have around 40 members of staff, most of whom based in the Netherlands at our head office in The Hague, although I'm over in the UK. We have a few other colleagues in the UK, some based in the Middle East. And well, we're active all over the world, working with around 300 universities. It's mostly the business schools, of course, given the nature of the management simulations. And we have a broad context and portfolio of simulations to serve a range of subjects across the business school portfolio. As you can tell, that's quite a large number of students we're working with each year. So whilst we have this big portfolio of simulations, there are some commonalities. And so this slide is quite helpful just in talking through that a little bit. So they're all web-based, as you would expect. They all work on the browser. There's no need to install anything. They all work on any device. So if students want to, they can access from their smartphones. But we always advise to have a laptop or a computer screen where possible, because there's quite a bit of information to consume. And it works like this. We'll put students into teams. So these are team-based simulations. And that's really important for students to get the skills and develop the competencies with their fellow students. So we put students into teams and they take over an existing company. So straight away, they have a range of internal and external analysis to do before formulating a business plan and then taking a range of decisions across a number of rounds in a simulation, where one round equates to 1 year of trading or 1 year of operations. In terms of how much time you should expect for students to spend on this on a weekly basis, well, that's quite flexible in terms of how we set the simulation up, but also how much time you've got available as well. It's important to say that in all our simulations, we have this intelligent dynamic algorithm, which is really crucial to developing the competitive setting, really. And what we mean by that is that students are not just competing against a computer, but they're actually directly competing against the other student teams in the same class, in the same course. So it's really quite lifelike, quite real life, as close to real life as you can get in a simulation, of course. But that's what really drives the engagement and drives the competition. So if one team takes a load of decisions, well, those decisions will directly affect the performance of the other teams as well. We cater for all student levels, and we can tailor our simulations as well to make them more or less complex depending on the level as well. A number of our simulations are very flexible, so we can add or remove different strategic frameworks. We can modify the news items, which is part of the external analysis, and we'll often have curveballs attached to them, so will affect certain market events as well. So there's various ways we can tailor the simulation. So feel free to talk to us afterwards if you're interested. A little bit high level, but in terms of the why we generally find universities or business schools want to adopt management simulations, well, of course, it's giving students, meeting students' expectations in terms of providing high quality digital resources. So it really speaks to the whole digital literacies piece, but it also provides a good learning experience for students and improves their learning outcomes as well. Of course, it's an opportunity to apply the subject matter theory, which is really important. But just as importantly is also the opportunity for students to develop their skills and work in their teams to really improve their core competencies. It can be used strategically across the business school as well to improve things like graduate outcomes, of course, which is really important to universities, but also at an earlier level in the educational sort of process around improving non-continuation. So, avoiding dropouts and improving continuation rates and things. Of course, it's getting students this active and inclusive education, because sometimes for students, it can be too much theory. And so having the opportunity to apply the theory and make sense of it, giving them the context and the relevance to make sense of what the theory means is really important. Okay, well, I think last slide from me now before I stop sharing for a minute and we'll hand over to Joel. But just to sort of say that this simulation that Joel's using is this ProSim Advanced simulation at the top. Well, actually, ProSim Advanced is often used for strategic management, but we also have an operations management version of this. So it's a very flexible simulation that allows us to tailor it a little bit depending on the focus of the course. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that, and we'll hopefully have some time for my colleague Milo as well later on to maybe demo the simulation or a couple of simulations as well. But yeah, as you can see, we have a wide variety of simulations, and therefore we are able to sort of be that experiential learning partner to the business school. So as I say, please talk to us about how we can help afterwards if you'd like to know more information about our pricing or about how we provide support and support you through the process, or how we'll review your course specification or anything like that. We're happy to have a consultation with you to do so. I'm going to stop sharing. Joel, once again, really glad you could join us today. So thank you for that. How are you and how are things?
I am fine and things are fine, and I'm looking forward to sharing my knowledge with the participants.
That's great. That's great. And just quickly, Joel, just remind me, you're using this on your MBA course, right?
Yeah, funny story. I'm the assistant department chair of the Department of Management at Rowan University. And so one of my jobs in the month of August is to be the acting department chair. And so 3 months before the semester began, the person who was supposed to teach operations analytics said, I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to give you any information about how to do it. And I had to figure it out, I had to do it myself. So one of the first things I knew I wanted was a simulation, because we want to have active learning. Today's students want a multimedia experience, an interactive experience. They don't want to be taught the way we were taught. And so I basically found you guys on the internet. It was one of the first things I needed to do, because it takes a long time to get information technology approval to use any software. So I knew this was going to be my biggest roadblock. So even before I chose a textbook, I chose a simulation. I found this one. It appeared to be a good one, and it has been a good one. And I will also point out that I am not being compensated in any way by Edumundo. I hope they would buy me a cider if I was ever in the United Kingdom or the Netherlands, but I have no plans to go to either country in the immediate future. So this is a completely unbiased opinion you're getting from me.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that, Joel. And I can confirm we would be happy to buy you a cider if you ever do come to the west of England here, which actually is known for its cider, the west of England. So this is definitely cider country. So it sounds like the course was really thrust upon you then. So it was quite last minute that you realized you were teaching the course.
Yeah, I had 3 weeks.
Okay, well, we're quite glad you found us anyway. That's great. And yeah, I mean, I think, why don't I share the screen again and hand back over to you.
Okay. Yes, I'll talk more specifically about my experiences with this course later, but first I want to give some useful information to everybody about how simulations fit into assurance of learning. So you'll get the slides back up?
Yeah, I will indeed. Yeah, here we go.
So what is assurance of learning? Assurance of learning means different things in different educational contexts. For example, if you are doing lifeguard education and there are 3 ways to save a life, you wouldn't be satisfied if 95% of the lifeguards knew 95% of the ways to save a life. You would want 100% of the lifeguards to know 100% of the ways to saving the life, and you wouldn't allow anybody to be certified as a lifeguard unless they could do that. Business education isn't like that. 100% success is not reasonable or practical for us, and so that's not what they're looking for. First of all, let's say who they are. The primary impetus for this is coming from our accrediting agencies at the regional and national levels, and also within the business fields with AACSB, the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. They are very interested in universities' assurance and learning efforts. The way AACSB works is that once every 5 years, they send a team of 3 people out to visit your campus, and the 3 people are all deans of business at other campuses, and they're not stupid. They're very well aware of what's going on, and they can tell if you have a real assurance of learning plan or if you're faking it. And we have a real assurance of learning plan. We've done this for a long time, and it's a strength of our applications for reaccreditation. But the way it works in the business education context is that they don't want to see perfection. If the accrediting team comes and you say to them, 100% of our students achieve 100% mastery in everything, they're not going to believe that. They're going to figure that the questions were too easy. What they want to see is they want to see improvement. They want to see a loop. They call it closing the loop. So in 1 year, ideally you do this on an annual basis rather than on an every semester basis. You collect data. You come up with a way that you might be able to effectuate an improvement in the data. You try again the next year and see if you improved it. Whether or not you have improved it or not, it still counts as closing the loop. But if you do this right, you should have some examples of improvement that you can share with the team. And again, they'll be able to tell whether you were doing this for the entire 5 years since the last review, or whether you started doing it a month before they got there. And so it's important to have this as a part of the culture of the university, not just in the year before the study team comes to visit, but for the entire time. That's what they're looking for, and the simulations can be used in that respect, as we'll see.
And Joel, just to clarify then, for my benefit, certainly, and perhaps others as well. So this last point there about perfection. So there is no real sense of this is a perfect model, and so instead it's about continuous improvement always. So no matter how close to what perfect might be, you still want to be improving all the time, right?
Well, once you get close to perfect, what they want you to do is assess something else. Because okay. You're not measuring every single thing you could measure in business education. You'd be swamped. They don't want to see a thing where you're measuring 700 different things. They want you to be looking at maybe 10 things or 12 things. And so if you do achieve a situation where you are running close to perfection, they want you to stop assessing that and start looking at something else instead.
Okay, thanks. I'll switch to the next slide.
So one of the things that you may notice if you could see me right now is that I'm old. I'm older than the picture of you that you saw before. And one of the benefits of being old is having experience. So we've been doing this assurance of learning thing for a long time, and I've been involved with it for a long time. And so I can appreciate how it's evolved over time. Back when about 20 years or so ago, the AACSB and other accrediting agencies had a preference for nationally standardized tests so that you could compare yourself with how you were doing at institutions of other institutions, and that was a lot of problems. The tests weren't very good. I don't know if any of you were my age, but I remember we got to see the questions for the tests, and we were very dissatisfied with the tests that they had, and they also weren't mission driven. AACSB wants to see a harmony between your mission and everything else you do, including your assurance of learning. So if your mission stresses diversity awareness, they want to see something in assurance of learning about diversity awareness. In our case, our mission stresses entrepreneurship, so they want to see something about entrepreneurship. The nationally standardized tests aren't set up to do any of that stuff, so they've really fallen out of favor, which is good because they were very expensive and not very effective. So then we move towards the next thing, which is still probably the most common model, but it's not the most evolved model, which is multiple choice tests and capstone courses. These are mission driven. These are faculty driven in the sense that we make up the questions. Typically, the way it works, in our case, our capstone course has 8 prerequisites. So we have a 90 question test with 10 questions each, 10 from the capstone course and 10 each from each of the prerequisite courses that were developed by the professors who teach those courses. And so this is better than nationally standardized tests because it is tailored towards the individual circumstances of each university, and it's also a faculty-driven process rather than just buying it from somewhere else. But the problem is it's hard to achieve improvement. In the United States, it's going to be a 4-year degree program. I understand in the United Kingdom it's 3 years, but and in other countries it may be more or less years. But if it's really any sort of time gap at all, it's very difficult to effectuate improvements as measured in the capstone course based on something that they learned 2 or 3 years earlier. Because for in our case, for example, accounting is one of the first things they'll learn about, and they'll learn about accounting 2 years before they take this exam. Well, let's say we find out that they're not very good at accounting, and so we make a change to the way we teach accounting so that they'll be better at it. Those results won't filter through until 2 years later, because whoever got that improved teaching will not take the test until 2 years after they got the teaching. And so we use these as a complement to some of the other things that we do. And of course, the nice thing about multiple choice tests from the standpoint of this is that the way AACSB typically likes to see the reports is they don't want to see just raw numbers. They want to see it grouped into 3 categories: exceeds expectations, meets expectations, and does not meet expectations. So the beauty for the multiple choice tests, if it's 100 questions, if it's a 10 question test, you can say if they got 8 or more right, they exceed expectations. If they got 5 to 7 right, they met expectations. If they get less than 5 right, they failed to meet expectations. And you give them the percentage of students in each one of those 3 categories. So it's very easy to set up the categories with the multiple choice tests, and that's why multiple choice tests in general are popular. But the problem with putting it in the capstone course, the other problem with putting it in the capstone course is it kind of makes the entire responsibility shift over to the people who teach the capstone course, whereas it should be something that permeates the entire institution. Almost everybody should be involved in assurance of learning so that you have a real assurance of learning culture. And that brings us to the last thing here: having a variety of assessments and a variety of courses. Having a variety of assessments shows the, first of all, is sensible because we teach in a variety of ways, and why would we only use multiple choice tests to measure everything? Also, using it in a variety of courses is helpful because it allows the people to teach the course to effectuate improvement in the next loop. Remember when we went back to when we talked about the assurance of learning cycle, the closing loop cycle: measure, come up with a plan to improve, and then measure again. So this can be done if we're doing this in the accounting class and we do something, and then the next year we'll see if it worked or not. We don't have to wait 2 years after they learned it before they take in the capstone course. And using the variety of assessments shows the accrediting folks that we're not trying to do this as quickly as possible or as easily as possible, or we're not trying to devote as little effort as possible to this. It's not something you need to strike a balance with assurance of learning. It shouldn't be something that consumes all of your resources and diverts attention away from your teaching. On the other hand, it shouldn't be an afterthought. So it needs to be something in between. Using a variety of assessments is helpful because it shows that you do care, and it also allows you to effectuate improvements in a variety of ways, and simulations can be part of this. What you can't use as part of the assessments, although they do encourage a variety of assessments, what you cannot use is final grades in the course. They don't want to see final grades in the course. They figure that final grades in a course is too broad of a measure, is not specifically directed to any particular skill that you wanted them to improve at, and so they don't want to see that. They also don't want to see student reactions. So if it's like the students liked the course, that's also not something that they want to see. The only time they're willing to accept student evaluations is when it comes to measuring teamwork, because who else knows? We put the students together in teams. Who has any idea whether the teams whether a student was a good teammate, except for their other teammates? So with the limited exception of assessing teamwork, they don't want to see self-assessments and opinions. They want to see something that's graded. And also the overall course grade is never acceptable. So the variety of assessments and a variety of courses is really what they want to see. And that's going to relate to the next slide, I think.
Yeah, well, Joel, just a couple of thoughts. So certainly in the UK here, and I'm not sure, I guess, also in North America as well, there's often quite a lot of talk. In fact, we held a webinar about it earlier this year about authentic learning and authentic assessment as well. And is it the case that also, AACSB and other accreditation bodies, they want to see a variety of assessments also because they want to see that there's some sort of demonstration of authentic assessment as well? So something that will link back to the real world of work as well. So thinking about multiple choice questions, for example, multiple choice tests, perhaps that's not really indicative of the sorts of things that students will be expected to do in their real world of work. So something about that sort of linking back and having some sort of real world relevance. Or am I way off the ball here?
Absolutely. Although they won't necessarily be making these same decisions when they immediately start in the workplace that they're making in the simulations. But the purpose of it is really to more look at it from a multifaceted standpoint, and it isn't. It has the effect. It's not to show them for in itself that you're doing that you're going beyond the minimum you need to. It's to show them that you have a culture where you value these things. So using the variety of assessments is really about showing AACSB and other accrediting agencies that you care about this, because the thing about, there's a lot of resistance to this. People think of this as being extra paperwork, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a meaningful process that effectuates true improvements in student learning if it's approached the right way.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what I would have to say about that.
Okay, all right. And is that a cat's tail I can see in your screen there, or is that?
Oh yes,
I
have two cats.
Okay.
I let the this is Dwight. You'll probably never meet Floofy. Floofy is shyer than Dwight, but Dwight helps me with my presentations.
Okay, well, I'm a bit relieved, because I think otherwise I was thinking maybe you had like some sort of tentacle or something then. Okay.
Well, I am part human, part cat.
Okay, all right, fine. Just while we're on the subject of multiple choice tests as well, and obviously in light of the fact that we've just come out of, or some would argue we're still in, to a certain extent, a pandemic, and everything went online, did multiple choice tests also have to go online, or perhaps you were already doing them online? I don't know.
Well, we were moving multiple choice tests online as part of the flipped classroom movement. In the flipped classroom, you don't take time in the classroom doing the stuff that we all had when we were in classes where the professors taught us stuff. That stuff all goes on behind the scenes. And when we're in the classroom, we're doing the stuff that is most beneficial to do in a classroom, which is typically group projects and exercises, because they're more easily facilitated when everybody's in the same room. And so there's been a movement in general to move away from doing tests, using class time for tests. Now, the downside of allowing students to do their tests on their own is that it's harder to stop them from cheating. But they were cheating anyway in the classroom. They were able to take, and so that's just if we make the test questions sufficiently engaging, then and we do things like scramble the questions, we can combat that to a certain degree. But the movement of getting the tests out of the classroom is something that's been independent of COVID. It preceded COVID, and it will continue after COVID goes away.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, I'll skip on to the next slide for you.
So simulations, this is not the only simulation I use in my class, and this is not the only simulation I've used for assurance of learning. The nice thing about simulations for assurance of learning is you have a record of what happened in the simulation, because the simulation provider is going to tell you not only who finished first and who finished last, but what decisions they made. And so in a simulation that I use for one of my other classes, I'm able to compare the decisions that they make each week, each period, to what the best decisions would be. And so I can see what percentage of teams, these things are typically done in teams, made the optimal decision. You can't really do that with the ProSim thing. That's way too complicated. The decisions are way too interrelated with each other. But you can look at the overall results of the decisions that are made in the operations management simulation that I used. So I can see, so the results one is the one that I've used in this particular, that I would use if I was using the simulation that we purchased from Edumundo, but you can use either one of these things. And the nice thing, as I said about it, is you do have it's a nice alternative to multiple choice tests. You have the permanent record. They give you the record of what decisions were made by each team and how each team did. And if it's a simpler simulation like the one I use in my undergraduate class, you can use the first method. For more complex simulations such as this one, you can use the second method. But either way, it can count towards assurance of learning. So assurance of learning, of course, there are steps that I skipped in the assurance of learning process. You need to decide what your learning objectives are going to be, but those tend to be pretty similar across business schools, and it's generally not that difficult to make a connection between what you've chosen for assurance of learning and the objectives. In this particular case, the objective we'd probably be looking at here would be something related to strategic decision making, that they can make complex, that the students can make complex decisions to benefit the organization. And so for that one, the second category here, results, could be a good method of assessing that.
So Joel, in terms of sort of like a practical sense of what that looks like, then let's say it's that 3-year point, you're being visited by the accreditation body, they're coming around doing visits, and they're looking at for all of this data and all of this information to sort of promote this assurance of learning. Are you literally having to log in and show someone what this, what the simulation and the data looks like, or are you taking screenshots from the system and emailing it to them? What does that look like?
Neither. They get a standard reporting format. They get a rubric. They are used to. It's easier for them to look at things if they get it in a standard format, and so we don't want to overwhelm them. They generally don't drill down that deeply. Okay. They might ask in certain individual cases, well, how did you exactly decide how you did this? And then in that case, we can say, well, here are the this is what I actually looked at. And what I did for this one, in a couple of slides, we talk about how I used this one for assurance of learning in this class. But it's not that they don't have time to look at each one of these things. They might pick one or two of these on the visit. They'll have a pretty good idea though by looking at it. If the numbers are the same every time, or if there's a lot of missing numbers, they'll realize that that we weren't taking it seriously. And really, what they're looking at here is us having a culture of assurance of learning and taking the process seriously rather than treating it as an administrative burden and devoting as little effort to it as possible. And as they're smart, they're all business school deans. We're not going to pull the wool over any of their eyes. They're going to be able to tell by looking at it whether we took this seriously and did it for the entire period or whether we didn't.
Okay, understood. Yeah, well, perhaps I was just thinking actually in terms of the simulations and the data that the simulations does provide. So, well, Milo will perhaps show us later on. But in the specific simulation that you use, I believe that's measured using the balanced scorecard approach.
Yeah, I'll talk about that in 2 slides.
Oh, you do? Okay, all right. I will skip forward.
2 slides from now.
Okay.
But in general, though, those are the 2 methods of doing it. So the ProSim. Again, I wanted to have a simulation. The way it worked was I wanted to use 6 of these things, but our information technology people took forever to approve this thing. So I would encourage any of you who are considering any simulations, any web-based simulation for your classes, to make the decision soon. Because I actually wanted to use this for 6 periods, but they didn't approve it until too late. So I was only able to use it for 5 periods. These are the actual comments. Nobody had anything negative to say about it. The way it would work is that the class met for 2.5 hours. So for the 5 weeks that I was actually able to do the simulation, we took the first hour of the time and allowed the students to work on make their simulation decisions. I made them be in the classroom. I had a student one time who said he was going to be in Florida that week and could he participate by phone? And I said, no, you're getting a 0 if you're not in the classroom, because you don't want to give them a way to be able to do this if they aren't there, because how do you know if they really are participating or not? And so but if they're in the room, you can count the heads and you can know that they're there. So I was very strict about them having to be in present and to make those decisions during the class. The other thing is, if they made the decisions before class and the other ones didn't, then what were they going to do for the hour while the other students were working on it? I wanted everybody to work on it during the same hour of time. And they took the whole hour. I could tell from looking at them. You can tell when you've been teaching for any length of time, you can tell when students are taking something seriously or when they're goofing off. And you could tell that they pretty much took the whole hour each time. So that was what we did for 5 hours, and nobody had anything. And again, I'm not being compensated by Edumundo here. This is what they actually had to say about it, that they liked it. And I will say the way it worked was that I had about 28 students and they were split up into 10 teams. And one of the things that they did that I wasn't expecting them to do that was really cool was they split them up into 2 competitions. They took 5 teams and said, okay, you're New York. And they took the other 5 teams and said, okay, you're Los Angeles. So what I did for grading it was if they finished first in their region, they got an extra point, and if they finished last in their region, they lost a point. And I just did that. And one of the things I've had with some of my other simulations, there's been a problem is that the same team has won all the time, which is the problem, is demotivating the other teams when that happens. That did not happen here. There was a good variety in terms of the number of teams that won, and nobody complained about it. Nobody thought it was a bad thing. Everybody thought it was a really cool thing that they really enjoyed doing. And when you're teaching an MBA class, it's really important to get them involved. It's really important at all levels of university education nowadays with today's population of students, but especially the MBA level. You want them to be making decisions. You want them to be more actively engaged in their learning, and a simulation in general is a great way to do it. So the way it worked in this case was they met for an hour. Somebody from Edumundo had a WebEx link, a Zoom link, and met us for an hour. And the poor guy, I think it was midnight in the Netherlands where he was, because it was 6:30 at night on the East Coast of the United States where we were, but he showed the great patience and sat with them for the hour and showed them what to do. And then my recollection is, and for that class, I think I gave them an hour after that to make their first decision. Then for the other classes, they weren't there. But well, what happened is that an hour and a half after class time, the simulation would close and they would automatically email me the results. And so I gave them the first hour to do the simulation. Then I would be lecturing for half an hour, and then I'd stop and check my email and get the simulation results. They send me one email for New York and one email for Los Angeles. Remember, they split my my teams up into two groups to compete against each other. And then that data that they gave me from the reports was what I was able to use later. It was a permanent record that I had, so I was able to use it for assurance of learning for this. This took time, and so because it's takes time, it's not suitable for every class. If you have a lot of content that you need to plow through in the class, you might not have 6 extra hours. But that was not the case in this class. I knew I had time for it, and we certainly plan. We're going to do this again in the fall. I won't be teaching it, but we'll certainly be using the simulation again. And then, although they liked it, as I noted earlier, that doesn't count for anything for our accrediting bodies because they don't want to hear that students like that. That's considered to be inadequate. And in the training literature as well, I'm primarily an HR guy, and in the training literature, when we're evaluating training, trainee reactions are typically considered to be the most inadequate form of training evaluation. So we do want to be looking at other things.
So anecdotal evidence and anecdotal comments from students can't be used then for assurance of learning.
No, basically no. That's not. Yeah, that's not what they want to see. They want to see numbers. They want to see improvements in the numbers. And so, if you are using now, that doesn't mean you can't use textual information. We've used textual information in other cases, but we've converted it into numbers. We've taken their written answers and classified them as either meets expectations, exceeds expectations, or fails to meet expectations. And then we have so what the accrediting team sees is the rows and the columns, which is what they want. It's what they're used to, and you need to give it to them in the way that they're used to receiving it.
Okay.
So then I got to do it for only 5 weeks because our IRT people took forever to approve it. Even though, and I'll get on my soapbox for a second, the company's based in Europe, and Europe has stronger information protections than we do. So I think they should just automatically approve any software that we purchase from any company in Europe. But they still drag their feet on it, and as a result, I was able to do I got 7 weeks instead of 8. I was trying to do 8 weeks. That was it. The 8 weeks is considered the proper amount, the best amount of time to do this, but I was only able to do 7 because it took time to get it together. So I had 70 results to look at, and this is the thing about the balanced scorecard. What it says is that your stock price went up or down. It isn't really a stock price. It's really a how you did in terms of your balanced scorecard overall, whether you achieved an overall improvement or an overall decline. And so in this particular case here, I'm just showing increase and decrease. If you could split it up into 3 categories as well, but I just have it in 2 here. And so I have this, and in this particular case here, they made 70 decisions because there were 10 groups and there were 7 periods that we did this. We did 7 iterations of this, and for 57 of the 70 of them, they improved, and for the 13 of them, they didn't. It was this was also a cool thing. The company reached out to me with some guidance for the students who are consistently doing a bad job of making decisions to help them, and they also have a support line, which I will encourage students to use next year. The main and so they pointed out one of the things is it's very complex simulation. That's why they need an hour to make their decisions each time. And so they were making suboptimal decisions primarily in the area of market research. They weren't spending enough money on it. And so I'll have to, that's how we're going to try and improve. We'll explain to them beforehand and as part of the course content why it's important to invest in market research and how it helps you out with your profitability and your operations if you have good market research. And then we're hoping then what we'll find in the future is that a higher percentage of companies will show an increase in stock prices and a lower percentage of companies will show a decrease in stock prices, which will show that we improved. But even if we get the same result or the worst result, it's still a loop. We still tried. And the main thing is that we're making an effort. And that's what the accrediting agency is looking for. They want some successes. If you're making a sincere effort at this, you should succeed sometimes. You shouldn't fail all the time. But they just want to see primarily that you're making a sincere effort. And this certainly proves that you are when you do things like this.
Okay, I think that's the end of the slide. Is that your last slide, Joel?
That's my last slide.
Yeah.
That's all my knowledge. That's everything I know.
Okay, all right. Well, in that case, well, I have a few thoughts, but perhaps it's better if I open it up to the participants who have joined us today. Great to have you all here again. So thanks for attending. Feel free to to ask Joel anything you like to do with assurance of learning or using simulations. And it's great to hear, Joel, as well, the fact that you've not just used this simulation, but you've also had some general experience of using simulations before as well.
Yeah, simulations are great for assurance of learning. Oh, can I see the cat? No, the cat, one of the things about cats is that they have a mind of their own. I can see the cat. If it's any comfort to you, I can see the cat right now, but you can't. The cat is out of camera range, and there's nothing I can do to get the cat in camera range that won't result in me getting scratched.
I don't think that's any consolation, Joel. I think we really want to see the cat, but no, thanks, Roger, for that. Are there any other questions? Any non-cat related questions?
I do have two cats, but you'll never see the other one. The other one's shy.
Okay, all right. Well, it's normally my dog that's interrupting these webinars, but he's being quite quiet now, which is nice. I was just thinking about assessment. Oh, there's a question here from William. Are others on your campus using Edumundo as well?
No, I am the only one on our campus that's using it. However, because I have achieved the IRT approval for using Edumundo, it would be easier for other people to do it. And so it is. They have a variety of simulations that we could use for other courses in the College of Business, and it will be easier for them to do that now that they know they can get relatively speedy approval of it.
Absolutely. So now we've gone through that sort of supplier setup process, isn't it? We can yeah, hopefully make it easier for any of your colleagues, isn't it? From Desiree, how do you overcome the barriers of getting learners to work in teams?
Learners hate working in teamwork. They hate working in groups. And this is something that's really been a real failure of business education, because students learn the groups are trouble and they're better off to working on their own, and they shouldn't rely on their neighbors to help them. I assign them to groups. I don't give them any choice over they prefer to be assigned to teams, but my experience in the working world was nobody ever asked me who I wanted to have on my team or who I didn't want to have on my team. So I just randomly assign them to groups. And if they don't like the group mates, that's too bad. However, I did have a situation where one group mate was sexually harassing the other two group mates, and I had to step in that case. But in general, I have a hands-off thing. They get who they get. So I had a situation with one group where two of the people didn't show up, and so the one person had to do everything by themselves, and that was unfortunate. It was extra work for them, but I just gave them a little extra credit for the work that they had to do on their own. I don't have a lot of sympathy for them for not wanting to work in groups. I don't feel that I have to cater to that, because they do have to work in teams anyway. It's a much bigger problem for my online classes. What I'm finding for my asynchronous online classes is that the teamwork is much bigger of a problem, and I don't really have a solution for that, because some of the students, I just finished an asynchronous online class where they had to work on a group project, and some of the students just refused to meet on it, and it was a real problem. And I can see how it might almost not be worth the trouble in an asynchronous online class to have group projects, but in a class that meets in a classroom such as my class, I just made them do it. It was for their own good. Sometimes you have to do the things they don't like, even for their own good.
Yeah, well, interestingly, some of our clients I know prefer to let the students choose their own groups to assign themselves, because they think somehow that sort of will be a better student experience, like the students will be happier. But I think from a pedagogical point of view, I think it makes more sense to either randomly assign the groups or just to do it yourself in some way. But that's interesting. So a question from Jim as well. How did you state the measure goal in your AOL report?
Well, the AOL report is actually not due for a couple of months, so I haven't actually thought about how I will actually state the measure, but it's going to be related to the goal of making strategic, being an effective decision making. That's one of our basic things that we're looking at. And then as that, I don't fully understand the question. I'm assuming that the question is what part of our learning objectives is this related to? And in this case here, we have everything about making strategic decisions. And so the objective will probably be something like students will make decisions that enhance the wealth of their that enhance shareholder value and stakeholder value, because it's a balanced scorecard that considers not only profits but other things as well. It's one of the things I like about the simulation. So we'll probably use it either there or under the responsible management category. Whether we have the two categories or the three categories, I can go back in there pretty effectively. It could be a deal where I report the groups that achieved a more than a 1% increase, a 0 to 1 or less than 0, and that's how I could split it up in terms of exceeds expectations, meets expectations, or fails to meet expectations. If that does not clarify, if that does not answer your question, please give me another chance.
Yeah, Jim. If not, feel free to unmute yourself and actually just ask a question verbally as well, if you'd like to do so. That's fine. In the meantime, and Jim, feel free to come back to us, but in the meantime, Roger is asking, are the algorithms deciding on the value of market research open and available, or must students intuitively discover them?
Oh, they're never open and available for any of these simulations because for one thing, it would make the simulation too easy, and for another thing, it would jeopardize it would tempt some universities to just not have the simulation and make the algorithm themselves. So I don't think it's ever a situation where you can actually see how the decisions they make directly translate into the results. I can't imagine that would ever be the case in any simulation.
No, I mean, actually, so we have some simulations which have a lot of detail actually on, once you've made your choices each round, you can really go into granular detail to see against which points you've scored the most, like against sort of which criteria you're doing really well and which ones you need to have improvements on. But the market research specifically, the way it works in this simulation is that you're told what the value is of the market research in terms of the cost of it. So you have to pay for this market research. You have to weigh up what you think will be the value to your business in terms of being able to be more informed, to make more informed decisions, versus the cost, of course, of buying that market research. So it's completely up to you. But no, you don't know how useful that market research is going to be until you have it. I hope that answers your question, Roger. Shanaz, choosing their own groups is not going to help because they're going to have a choice. Because they're not going to have a choice of who they work with in the real world. Yeah, in the real world of work, and I think the teamwork actually that students are doing, in the simulations is sort of emulating the real world of work in that sense. And you're quite right. Yeah, you don't have a choice. I think some of the lecturer clients who work with us already who do it that way just do so because they feel, well, the students will ultimately be happier if they get to choose their teammates because they'll be able to enjoy it more. But that's not necessarily that we're advocating that way to do it.
And also, again, being old, I have since I am tenured and I hold the rank of professor, I can do things that can negatively affect my student evaluations without having to worry about how it's going to affect my professional future. But the evaluations for the class overall were very positive. And so nobody complained about the teams in this class. Really, the only time I got complaints about the team is in fully online classes.
Right. Okay. All right. Desiree is asking, how does the data help with program level decision making? Do you have an example?
Well, in this particular case, I don't have an example. I think what she's referring to here is a situation where we add classes or change classes, or where we make changes to our curriculum as a result of the data. And that's something that they want to see as well. These are called, AACSB distinguishes between deep changes and shallow changes. The shallow change is mostly what we've been talking about here, changing the way I teach a class in order to achieve an improvement. But they also want to see more deep changes as well, changes to the curriculum. We actually did make a bunch of changes to our curriculum as a result of previous assessments that we've done. And this operations analytics class that I taught in the fall was a brand new class as part of our curriculum revamp that was directed by assessment. We decided that there were certain things we were spending based on the assessment results, certain successes that they were achieving, that they were spending too much time teaching certain things and not enough time teaching other things. And so we took some of our courses and cut their length in half. And that was a difficult political decision because nobody thinks everybody thinks somebody else's course ought to be cut in half instead of my course. But we were able to reach a consensus on this. And so, and that is also the sort of thing that they want to look at. You don't want to do that every day because it gets chaotic and it gets difficult to track your performance over time, but that's certainly something on a regular basis, maybe at least once every 5 years or so, that you want to take a look at and at least consider making that sort of deep change. And if you can say that it's related to assessment rather than something that you're doing because it seems like a good idea, then it's much more meaningful and much more impressive to the accreditors.
Great. Okay. Well, Desiree is saying thank you. This has been very helpful. Great work, Joel. So I think in a second I'm going to pass over to Milo because we're going to try and keep a little bit of time just to show, yeah, like what a couple of these simulations look like a little bit. But Jim is just saying, so the measure is stock price change, and the goal is something like X% of students will show a stock price increase of your.
Yes. In this particular case here, probably 80% of students will achieve a stock price increase of at least 1% in every quarter.
Okay. Okay.
And then,
Mevin is.
yeah.
Yeah. No, Mevin is asking for quizzes. Is there a possible cheat? How do you track that, or don't you?
Well, for quizzes, it's really not possible to track that. I have a 20-year-old, again, being old. I have a child who's in school right now, and they could cheat. You can't really. They have ways to cheat that we haven't even thought of. But the best you could do is to try and scrambling the questions helps. If it's not worth that much of their grade, then they're going to take it. It has to be worth some part of the grade, or else they won't take it seriously at all. But if it's worth, say, 10% of the grade or something like that, the quiz, excuse me, which in our particular case in the capstone course, it is worth 10%. That's enough to motivate them to try hard, but not enough to motivate them to get involved with cheating. And also the other thing about doing it online is if it's self-paced, they're going to be doing it at different times. The only way they can cheat is if they're doing it at the same time, and they typically don't bother. In this world, they just do it whenever it's convenient for them. So we don't think there's a big problem with that. We haven't noticed a trend over time that would indicate that we're seeing more cheating now than we did in the past.
Okay, okay. Great. Thank you, Joel. I think it's been really great to have so many questions coming through. Let's ask, let's hand over to my colleague, Milo. And, Milo, would you like to, I think you're going to show us a little bit about a couple of the simulations, perhaps sure. Specifically the balanced scorecard as well, because we've talked a little bit about that already.
I will. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Lean. Well, everyone, hi, my name is Milo Hendricks. I'm from the Netherlands, calling in from the head office of Edgemundo. We've talked about this management simulations now for 50 minutes. It's time to show something, isn't it? To look at it, how it looks. So what I'll do, I will share my screen and show you one and perhaps two simulations, but very briefly, because I'm conscious of the time. We only have about 10 minutes left for this webinar. What is good to know, what is very special about our management simulations is that students work in teams. Every team manages their own company in a highly competitive setting. That means that they're actively playing against the other student teams in the same class. That also means that if we would be a team and we would, for example, lower our selling prices, that we really would steal some market shares from the other student teams. So therefore, there is no correct path to win in these management simulations. It's really about how you analyze the markets, the changes in the markets, how you analyze your competitors, buying market researches, those kind of things, and respond to that, of course, on strategic and tactical level. It's played in rounds, and every round stands for 1 year of operations. What you see here is the dashboard and sort of the workflow for the students. So it starts with the green question mark. It's a question mark because we'd like them to do an external analysis before they start. So for example, as I said, how does the market look like? What kind of competitors do I have? Are there any news items which are important to me, to our company or our market segments? Those kind of things. Then there's also the internal analysis, of course, about the financials and the products in stock and those kind of things. So based on that analysis, we ask them to come up with some strategic decisions. This is quite a flexible simulation. So some of the universities use a whole bunch, sometimes 20 different strategic frameworks, and others only choose a couple, depending on the focus of the module subject or the course subject. Once they've chosen their strategic options, they will take tactical actions on operational level for purchasing, distribution, marketing, and a whole bunch of other departments. I always first ask them to go to profile when they start. So if you go to profile in the submenu here, they can find the 4 different products in which they are trading in this simulation: sports equipment, sort of, so skateboards, tennis rackets, those kind of things. And we ask them to come up with names for those products. Should be sort of marketing kind of names which reflect your sort of main porter strategy, right? Same goes for company profile. They could come up with their own company names, their location of their headquarters, maybe a slogan, upload their own logo, those kind of things. And often we also ask them to add their names to the teams and choose a position in their team. So one could be the CEO, one could be the CFO, one could be the marketing director. And what you could decide on if you want to assess them individually is in the end, ask them to write a reflective report from their own roles perspective, with their own roles, objectives, etc. So in the main menu, what you find, communication tab, where the news items start. At the start of every round, every year, there's news items. Could be a global financial crisis, could be a pandemic, could be a strike in the transportation industry, all kinds of decisions which will really have an impact on their specific markets, etc. And they will also find the schedule here, so the upcoming deadlines for each of the rounds played. So there's more analysis to do in the results where we're looking back at the previous years. For example, the first one here is sales and inventory, where you find, for example, for the skateboards, what your demand was last year, almost 400. We had about almost 600 in stock. So we have sold the full amount of 399, resulting in an unsold inventory of 185, which is not that good because unsold inventory, you have to insure, you have to put it in a warehouse, so it will cost you a lot of money. If we look to other years, for example, of this company, you will probably see sometimes here for tennis rackets, for example, the opposite, that the demand was 563, while they only had 450 in stock. So they could have earned and sold a lot more if they have maybe, well, raised their price or purchased more tennis rackets in the previous year. Other indicators for them to analyze are, for example, the financial sheets, the income statement. Did we make a profit, yes or no? There's also the results of the market researchers. There was a question about it. So they have to buy the market researchers in the decision section, and here they find the results. So for example, last year, they've researched what are the selling prices of the other student teams. So we are, in this example, ESD Sports, but Black Eagle is selling their skateboards for $2 more than we do, you know, so they can really analyze and spy a bit on their competitors. And depending on what they buy of market research, they will get different stuff. So for example, in the year before this one, they ask what the demand would do for the different products in the upcoming years, or something about the leadership styles, which fits their staff best. Then there's, of course, the market shares for them to analyze. So compared to the other student teams, the other competitors in the same market, you can see what your market shares are for the 4 products. And then we have the balanced scorecard, which was discussed, of course, and very important, perhaps the most important result for them to analyze. You find about 12 different indicators here. They have to try to get them all in the green to get most of the points for the ranking list. So you can clearly see where to start focusing on. So at the start of the round, we always advise them first go to the balanced scorecard, because that gives you a really good indicator of what goes well or what goes wrong within your company, and why you are on the top or at the bottom of the leaderboard. Having said that, the leaderboard is called the stock exchange, where you find all your competitors, their market names, the points they've gained, and the change in compared to the previous round. Now I quickly go to the strategic options, because in strategic options, this is what after the analysis we ask them to think about. For example, what's your market structure? Or how would you deal with queuing management, single line queue or multiple channels? And then they also have to justify and based on their queuing disciplines. Other stuff here is about order qualifiers, order winners, which is a theory developed by Andy Neely from Cambridge in the UK. The CSR strategy, for example, as well. And if you like, there's a whole list of about 10 or 15 other strategies we could add to this list if needed, if it fits the course. Well, the final tab, decisions. This is where the gameplay, the actual gameplay starts. So on the left side in green, you find all the departments. And for each department, they have to set or update or fine tune their decisions. So for example, this is the marketing department. Here we can see that we have 743 skateboards in stock, and we can set or change our selling prices. Last year was 230. Perhaps we like to sell a bit more, so we changed it to 200. There's also some other marketing decisions here about communication budgets, marketing mix, and some extra quality checks. At purchasing, it's about analyzing the different suppliers from all around the globe. Brodowski from Poland, Hong Kong from Hong Kong, obviously. Kansas from the US, Henderson from the UK, and Schneider from Germany. And they all have their own costs, their own quality, dependability, flexibility, and speed. So it's up to the teams to analyze which supplier fits them best. And based on that, they can place an order. They can say, well, I'd like to order 500 ice hockey sticks from Schneider, which will cost me $140 or dollars to purchase. Well, there's some HR decisions to take: salaries, number of sales reps, hiring a new sales manager. Some more R&D decisions to improve your processes or your products. And if you improve your products, you get a higher demand, of course. And as I said, the market research, very important. As Joe already explained, it's very important that students invest in this. So, for example, what are the selling prices of my competitors' products? Or what will the demand do for the products in the upcoming years? It will cost you some money and some time, and after calculation of the round, they will get the results, and it's very valuable for them to analyze, of course. And as I said, it all leads to a stock exchange. So we have winners and losers in the end. You know, to be honest, it's about learning more than it is about winning. But having said that, for students, this is really engaging. And the engaging part, the fact that they really want to win, also changes their mindset, that they really want to absorb all the information and the frameworks and the strategies, etc. we put in the simulations. Because once they understood those, they're able to score more points and they're able to win from their peer students. That's what they want to achieve, of course. So therefore, it's a really fun way of learning for students, and you'll find out if you start using this that it's, well, quite fun and good for the academics as well. This was just in a nutshell how the simulation works. I had plans to show you some of our other simulations as well, as we have about 10 different ones. For example, this international business simulation. But unfortunately, we are out of time, I'm afraid, Leon, so I will hand over back to you. And you're muted, by the way. Rookie mistake.
I am muted, you're quite right. I'm not now, though. Thanks for pointing that out, Milo. And yeah, we have run out of time, unfortunately, but great, we were able to show a little bit about the simulation which Joel is using on his MBA class. So if you have any questions about that, any of the participants, or any more questions about what we've discussed today, please feel free to get in touch. I've just shared my screen with my details on there. Of course, you can access or get in contact with us through the website as well. Joel, it's been great talking with you today. Thanks so much for giving up your time. I know you're busy, so really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And can people connect with you on LinkedIn or anything like that if they have?
Absolutely. I'll put my email address in the chat window.
Okay.
Anything you can find on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks so much for all the participants for joining. Okay, great. So Joel's email address is in the chat there if anyone wants it and you have further questions. Great. Well, in that case, webinar is over. All the best. Bye-bye.